I just want to start very quick. I'm really nervous that this is a bit low demand, to be honest, but I just want to start with something. I want you to just think carefully about a song or a piece of music that in 2012 became kind of your piece of music. It doesn't have to be something that was made in 2012. It might have been made in 1823 or something. But can you think of a song or a piece of music that was sort of your music of the year, or one of your big pieces of music of the year? Just have a think silently. Have you got one? Well, later on we can share it, but most people have probably got a song. You know, for some people it was Adele, and for other people, but it might have been Tchaikovsky. I don't know what it was, but something that really, really worked for you in 2012. My song of 2012 happened because I had the extraordinary good fortune to be invited to a place I'd never heard of, to my shame, in my life before. It's a place called San Salvador de Jujuy in northern Argentina. Jujuy is the name of the city. Never heard of it. I've been to Argentina so many different times, I'm ashamed that I hadn't heard of it, you know, because we all know about Córdoba and Buenos Aires and all these places, but Jujuy, right up in the north, never been there before. And I was invited to the university there to do 4 days of workshops. And I went with some nervousness, not knowing what to expect. And when I got there, I walked into the university. You can't see that too clearly, but essentially, and it was everything you hope for from a good South American, Latin American university. The place is plastered with student posters denouncing capitalism and the government and everybody and the whole thing, and great quotes from Bertolt Brecht and stuff. It was like walking back into the well, I obviously wasn't there in the 1960s, but it was like walking back there anyway. Anyway, the point of the story is I went to Jujuy and I had the best time of my life. I met some of the most wonderful teachers and the students were great. And then after it was all over, a group of us, they very kindly, we went off to discover northern Argentina. Now, so there are at least 2 people in this room who know about northern Argentina, but I didn't before. I didn't know that northern Argentina was part of the Inca Empire once upon a time, that it's almost more like Bolivia than the kind of sexy flesh pots of Buenos Aires or anything else like that. You go to places like this. This is Purmamarca, and you can't quite see it, but that's because of the colors gone wrong. But that's called La Montaña de Siete Colores, the mountain of 7 colors, because they're rich in minerals. So you get these fantastic different colors in the rock. And if the color of the projector was truer to what's on my screen, you'd see those 7 colors. Anyway, so we went there. I had the most wonderful time. And the night that we went to Purmamarca, we went to a fantastic restaurant. We were the only people there, about 7 of us. And we had this wonderful evening, just terribly, you know, just teachers, we're nice. We're kind of quite a nice community, really. And we got on terribly well. And one of our number, a teacher from the La Universidad de San Salvador de Jujuy, is a guitarist. And like all guitarists that you've ever met, you know, once he gets his guitar out, he wouldn't shut up. And there he is. It's not a very good photo. There's Miguel playing the guitar. And it was all terribly kind of romantic and wonderful. And the next morning when I woke up, I couldn't get one of the songs out of my head. I couldn't remember the melody or anything. All I remembered was some words. It's something like, quiero hacerte el amor en la mañana de Santiago y pintar con tu acuarela mis ocasos, which means something like, I want to make love to you in the mornings in Santiago and paint with your watercolors my sunsets. It sounds crap in English, I know, but in Spanish, but in Spanish it sounds rather wonderful, I think. And it just seemed terribly romantic and so on. And so I asked Miguel the next morning, I said, what was that song? He said, oh, it's a guy called Rally Barrio Nuevo. He's an Argentinian. Santiago, by the way, a town in Argentina, not the other Santiagos you can think of. So I went and rushed in to see this thing on YouTube, and I'm going to do the unforgivable thing. Now I'm going to play you a bit of this song on YouTube, and there's something awful about when people play you the music they like. And I've been guilty of this. Have you ever done that? Have you ever done that? No, this bit's the best bit, this bit. I'll try not to do that. While you watch Rally Barrio Nuevo, there's a horrible bit with a girl, but that's neither here nor there. While you watch this, I'm interested in 2 or 3 things. His playing of his guitar, left hand, right hand. Does he actually look at what he's doing or not? First question. Second question, does he make any mistakes?
Con tu pollera que vuela, bailo esta samba sin prisa. Tus movimientos me llevan como un cometa a la prisa, tus movimientos me llevan como un cometa en la brisa. Ya me estoy acomodando en este instante del tiempo. Tus pies dan vueltas y vueltas, tus labios dos besa el viento, tus pies dan vueltas y vueltas, tus labios los besa el viento. Esta samba hecha miel se hace una hoguera en la distancia. Quiero hacerte el amor en las mañanas de Santiago, pintar con tu acuarela mis ocasos. Quiero hacerte el amor en las mañanas de Santiago, amanecerme samba entre tus brazos.
Anyway, that's my song of 2012. It's terribly sentimental and romantic, but I kind of love it to pieces. And did he make any mistakes? What? What? The hair? Yeah, well, that's what he's born with. But did he make any guitar mistakes as far as you could see? Not one, not one. It was note perfect all the way through. Did he look at what he was doing? Sometimes, but mostly not. And what we know for sure is that that's not the first time he's sung that song. And it's certainly not the first time he's played that song. He must have practiced it like mad. And when you see people who are really good musicians, it turns out that they have practiced like mad, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to play their guitars without looking at what they were doing. And they can stand there. He's not looking at his guitar at all. Of course, if you're nervous and you're not as good as Adrian Underhill and you can't deal with 6 whole strings all at once, you could always learn one of these. This is a ukulele, in Venezuela they have something called the cuatro, but the ukulele is rather spectacular. For some bizarre reason, this instrument, which was popular in the 1930s, has suddenly become popular again in the UK, and lots of people are learning the ukulele. To give you an idea of what the ukulele sounds like, here is the greatest British ukulele player from a film of 1933, and he's singing a song which absolutely has a double meaning. It's called With My Little Ukulele in My Hand. Here we go.
Isn't love a very funny thing?
Oh, you're crazy.
I know that. But everybody's got a crazy notion of their own. Some like to mix up with the crowd, some like to be alone. It's no one else's business as far as I can see. But every time that I go out, the people stare at me with my little ukulele in my hand. Of course the people do not understand. Some say, why don't you be a scout, why don't you read a book? But I get much more pleasure when I'm playing on me uke. Of course I take no notice, you can tell. For mother's sound advice will always stand. She said, my boy, do what I say, and you'll never go astray if you keep your ukulele in your hand. Yes, son, keep your ukulele in your hand.
It really is. Anyway, but so he's playing away like that, and my brother's partner is currently starting to learn the ukulele. And I guess maybe like Adrian way back when he was just a kid, she's got something like this to look at. And if you notice what this is, for those of you who don't play the guitar or the ukulele, it's basically a diagram of the fingerboard of the ukulele. And there are only 4 strings, and the black dots show where you put your fingers to make chords. So what Trixie's been doing recently, but she says she's only got 6 songs to learn, and it takes her a hell of a long time. She wants to play the chord of C, so she goes the 3rd finger, and then she goes like this, and then that's no problem. The problem is how to change to the next chord, because then she has to get her fingers in a different configuration and change to the next chord. And she says it takes her about 3 minutes to go from one chord to the next, on 4 strings only. But if she does it often enough, maybe she'll become as good as George Formby, the guy you saw singing about his little whatever it was in his hand. And so there we are. Question, how many people here play a musical instrument quite well? So there's quite a few of you. So everyone here has practiced. You must have practiced. You didn't, what do you play? You're a guitar. Guitar and? Bass. Guitar and, Adrian? Guitar and? You're a violinist. Anybody else? Who else? Piano. You've practiced. You must have practiced to become even quite good at your thing. So what does practice look like? Well, when I looked at this conference program, I realized that there were 2 problems about the speakers on Friday. The first is our average age is about 126. And the second is the gender balance is pretty rubbish, actually, because it's, so I thought I would somehow change the gender balance and introduce you to Joanna. And she's my niece, by the way, and unlike Jim's son, she refused permission to be filmed. She had the chance to refuse permission to be filmed, but I did record a little audio interview with her. Now, Joanna is about between grade 6 and 7 on the trombone. That's about sort of B2 in Common European Framework kind of terms, something like that. So she's pretty good. And my question to her, as you'll hear, and I hope it comes clearly, is, I said, because she practices, she's quite a diligent practicer. And I said to her, why do you practice? Why do you practice?
So that I kind of know how to say something, and when I'm under pressure, I can just do it without having to think about it, really. Because it kind of, you remember how to do it, and you can do it automatically, really, once you've done it so many times. If you've done it again and again, you've done it, you can just kind of do it without thinking.
Basically, if you didn't hear that, and is the volume, basically she said, I do it again and again and again so that when I'm under pressure, I can play it without worrying about it. This is a 15-year-old girl. She's got it absolutely right. I do it again and again and again so that when I'm under pressure in a concert or a music exam or an audition, I can do it without freaking out. It's almost automatic, she says. And that, of course, is presumably why we did so much repetition in the past. For example, it's winter time in Greenwich. Everybody, it's winter time. Come on, again.
It's winter time in Greenwich.
Again.
It's winter time in Greenwich.
Again.
It's winter time in Greenwich.
Now, I'm guessing that we've pretty much got that. Summertime, it's...
Summertime in Greenwich.
Again.
It's summertime in Greenwich.
Again.
It's summertime in Greenwich.
Holborn.
It's summertime in Holborn.
You're good. So that's basically what Joanna is articulating is an essential idea about practice. And if you remember, those of you who were last year, I was talking about this. I was saying, why do musicians insist on their pupils practicing a lot? And the answer is, as we were saying last year when we were talking about dogme and stuff, people believe that practice works. The more you practice, the better you get. It's as simple as that. People believe, as one of my viola teachers has said to me, that practice is like putting money in the bank. The more money you invest, then when you stand on the stage at Carnegie Hall, you've got lots of money to spend. In other words, if you practice a lot and invest lots of time in practicing, when it gets to the stage where you want to spend your money, this is basically what Joanna was saying. And of course, what it's all about is something to do with the kind of muscle physical memory of the fingers or the lips or the breathing or the bow arm or whatever it is. If you practice enough, then your brain learns all the or the little tendrils and things that go down to the tips of your fingers, or your brain learns what kind of a breath you need to take if you're going to sing a wonderful aria or whatever it is. That's what it's like. Practice makes perfect. But it's not as simple as that. So when I started thinking about this talk, because I produced this little diagram for the first time last year when we were talking about dogma and stuff, I thought I wanted to go and ask some professionals, even more professional than Joanna, what they thought about practice. And that's what we're going to do for a little bit. Look at what practice really looks like. For example, I went to ask this guy. Now, some of you know him. This is a very close friend of mine, a guy called Steve Bingham. He's a very, very good violinist and all sorts of other things, and a conductor. And I went up with my flip cam and I said to Steve, what's good practice like? And he said...
Danger is that people think that amount of practice equals good practice, which is not the case. You're better practicing for 10 minutes where it's something that needs to be looked at and a problem that you actually solve, rather than spending 3 hours playing, which may well be building in, reinforcing bad habits, rather than trying to break those down and create new habits that are good habits.
Thank you very much. So what he says is, actually people think if you practice lots it's all going to be okay, but that's not the story. The story much more likely is practice less, but practice in a more focused way. In other words, and he talked about solving problems, problem solving. That what happens with music practice, good music practice, is about finding the bit that you find really difficult and working on it until you can get it right. Solving the problem. And if that's only 10 minutes, doesn't matter. If you've solved the problem, you've done good practice. Whereas if you play for an hour, just wanging your way through this piece of music, you could very well A, not solve a problem, and B, just solidify some of the habits you've acquired which aren't very good. This is Chrissy, and she's a violinist and a viola player, but she's also a teacher. She teaches kids. I asked her what she thought.
Good practice involves really major concentration and the ability to understand how to break something down into its real component parts, and then to have the patience to practice those in repeated, really carefully taking on board every single sound that you make and every tiny movement that you make with the bow, and then combining those together to the point where it becomes second nature. So
real concentration. By the way, you will hear echoes in this talk between what Jim and Adrian have been talking about and what I'm talking about. In fact, I'm very nervous about it. I'm just repeating what they have to say. But it came from a different place, this. Real concentration, she said, and listening to what you're doing and being conscious of what you're doing, monitoring what you're doing. It's not an easy ride. It's not just playing through. It's real concentration, really thinking exactly where your fingers are, exactly how you hold the bow, how long, which bit of the bow. It's really a concentrated issue. Now, this all became very interesting for me because when I was talking about repetition in Romania last year, one of the people in the audience, and her name has just escaped me, said, "Oh, you'd be interested in this." And she pointed me straight away to this rather good article called "The Myth of Practice Makes Perfect." The idea that simple repetition makes you perfect is a myth. Because if you're not practicing deliberately, that is with your brain and with your thought and with purpose, and she says whether it's a foreign language, a musical instrument, or any other new skill, you might as well not practice at all. In other words, if you're just going bah, 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 you might as well not practice at all. Good practice is deliberate. Good practice is something you're doing on purpose, thinking about it with your brain, not just your heart, and not just, oh, this is rather fun. This comes about from a man called Anders Ericsson and various other people who talk about deliberate practice. Deliberate practice. That, sorry to repeat myself, the amount of time you practice is not the issue. What matters is how deliberately you do it, with what focus, with what clear understanding of what you're doing. You remember Christina talking about being conscious of every little thing you do, every position of your finger, every whatever it is. And what Anders Ericsson says is noodling doesn't work. Noodling, for those of you who are worried that it has a bit of a George Formby-like connotation, does not mean anything like that. Noodling simply means what most guitarists and most instrumentalists do, which is to sit there and kind of play around and just oh, that's rather fun. You know, because we do. It's great fun if you're a musician just to sit there and kind of mess around. But noodling doesn't do it. Deliberate practice requires effort and is not inherently enjoyable unless you are so conscious of what it is you're aiming for that the concentration you put into practicing becomes an end in itself. Here's Tim Redmond. Now, Tim Redmond scares me because Tim Redmond is a conductor. He is a very well-known conductor. For example, he conducted the first performance of Powder Her Face, which is one of the most prominent new operas in the 21st century British operas. He conducts the Halle Orchestra, various people like that. He also conducts an orchestra I'm in. That's why I'm scared of him. And so I asked, and by the way, he's a really good oboe player, and he's also a double bass player. That's his second instrument. So I asked him what he thought good practice meant.
All the joins. You've got to find what you find difficult and why. Slow it down. Play it backward to back to front, upside down. Make the patterns fit under your fingers, whatever instrument it is you play. You've got to isolate the bits that are going to be a problem when you're nervous, when adrenaline is flowing through you. If you're a wind player, you need to breathe deeply. You've got to know exactly where you're going to take a breath. If you're a singer, exactly the same, and you have to practice it repeatedly. It's no good using chance to do very logical. You certainly don't need to rush anything. I think if you have, for example, a really difficult passage, play it at a speed where you can play every single note. Nothing is difficult if you play it slowly enough. And therefore, if your fingers can do it very, very slowly, it's only patience and time that will allow, that stands in the way of you being able to play it really very quickly indeed. So I would say slow it down, be analytical, be passionate about what it is you're trying to achieve, but control that passion and leave it for performance so that you use your time when practicing in a very calm and methodical way, and that way you achieve a lot more than if you're highly driven and angst-ridden and terribly overexcited about it. So I hope that helps.
So that's Tim's take on it. Patience, methodical, working out where the joins are, thinking about things, leave the passion till later, is a sort of message. And one last person, this is a woman called Emma, and she teaches kids. She teaches kids the violin. I'm sorry they're all classical musicians, these people. I'm not sorry at all, but they just happen to be because these are the people I had at the end of my little flip cam, to be honest. But this is, I said to her, what do you tell your kids about, the kids you teach? What do you tell them about practicing? And
well,
she said,
I always tell them that they've got to practice regularly. It doesn't have to be a long practice, short practice, but as often as they can manage during the week. It might be 5 minutes before they have their tea every night. Doesn't matter, just fit it in around their life. Just warm up with scales and then play their pieces and work at a few bars, the bars that are tricky, before they play through the whole piece. Don't just play through from beginning to end. Just work at little bits that are tricky before they put it all together.
It's amazing that how consistent the replies I got were. None of these people have been pre-primed, and we talked briefly about it in the wherever it was downstairs. Here are two professional musicians, and they have exactly the same thing. It's all about, well, this is my kind of summary of what my interviewees have said. Here's Joanna, and she articulates an absolutely key component of practice, which is if you play it a lot, it becomes automatic. And automaticity is a really important thing, so that when there are 4,000 people watching you, you don't completely blow your mind. You've done it so often before that even though you are quaking in your boots, shivering, you can get through it because you've done it lots of times before. Steve, Well, he said small is better than large, in the sense of actually short bursts of really concentrated practice are better than long bursts of not very concentrated practice. And he, for me, says one of the key things, which is practice is about solving problems. It's not about playing things, it's about solving problems. Chrissy talks about breaking things into their constituent parts. And she says it's all about listening to what you do, monitoring what you do. Tim, well, his idea was that you work out the joins. By the way, you slow things down so that you've got a chance to work out how to play them. And then you can speed it up again once your fingers have got used to this thing. And he also says, practice repeatedly, just like Joanna. Practice repeatedly, but methodically. And Emma, what does she say? She says, practice regularly. And look, here we are again. Exactly like Steve. Small is beautiful. Sort the problems first, kids, and then deal with the rest. This is, a lot of this comes to me because the woman I was telling you about, the teacher I was telling me about, put me onto this book. And I cannot recommend it highly enough. It was published last year. Gary Marcus is a cognitive psychologist. He works with Steven Pinker and people like that. And at the age of 38, 39, he decided to learn the guitar for the first time. And this is his book about it, in which he makes reference to a lot of learning and linguistic theory about what's going on. I highly recommend this book. It's very, very interesting. And one of the articles he quotes is a sort of final bit of this sort of introduction to the talk. By the way, don't panic. Introduction sounds as if it's only the first 5 minutes. We've been going for longer than that. I do realize it's not going to go on forever. Anyway, one of the articles he quotes is this very interesting article by Duke, Simmons, and Cash. And as you can see, they're all academics working in universities in Texas. They did this experiment in which they got a bunch of music majors, undergraduates, and they gave them a piece of Shostakovich, a few measures, a few bars of Shostakovich piano prelude. Very difficult. And they said to them, here it is, and tomorrow we're going to ask you to play it for us. So go off and practice, go off and learn it. And they filmed these people in their practice rooms and saw what they did. And the results were quite clear. There was no correlation of excellence between time practiced and excellence. In other words, the people who practiced longest didn't necessarily play best. But there was a correlation between the students who, when they came to a difficult bit, stopped dead in their tracks, worked on the difficult bit until they had solved it, and then went to the next bit. In other words, and I hear Steve in my ear now talking about problem solving, solving problems. In other words, the people who had the most success were the ones who didn't let the problems go past. They solved them, and then they went forward. Deliberate practice, concentrated practice, everything else like that. Now, what has this got to do with language learning? Well, that's a big question, and I'm not going to answer that question, although I'm going to make some suggestions. Is learning a musical instrument the same as learning a language? Most assuredly not. Are there any similarities between learning an instrument and learning a language? And the answer, obviously, I think there are, otherwise I wouldn't be giving this talk. But I'm not suggesting for one moment that this is a template now for teaching or learning. However, who's this gentleman? Stephen Krashen. And when you, and by the way, when you think of what I've just been telling you about language learning, you have to kind of start wondering about the basic duality he suggested between acquisition and learning. About the basic idea that languages are best acquired through a kind of overwhelming whoosh of comprehensible input in an unstressful situation. In case you think, as Scott Thornberry, I think, thought in a post on his A to Z blog last year, that Krashen is yesterday's news, Steve Krashen doesn't think he's yesterday's news. He was in Turkey about 2 months ago. Absolutely, I have never seen such positive responses to a conference plenary in my life on the social media, where he gave a plenary saying exactly what he said in 1980, whatever, which is that the best way of getting a language, I use the word get advisedly so I don't have to use one of the other two, the best way of getting a language is just to get masses of comprehensible input in a calm setting. Comprehensible input, for those of you who, just in case, comprehensible input means language you more or less understand, even though it's more advanced than your own level of the language you're learning. If you more or less understand it and you get enough of it through especially reading, he's a big reading fan, then you'll get language. And his big claim, which was fairly efficiently torpedoed at the time, but which he does not believe was torpedoed, his claim was that getting language like that versus getting language in a class where you learn the third person singular of the present simple, in high demand kind of teaching, if you like, in communication, the language you've got through being exposed to comprehensible input is available to you. But the language you get in the kind of things Adrian did with us this morning is not. That was the claim, and it got all of us really quite steamed up at the time. Crucially, one of the things he said was that, of course, learnt language, that is, for example, what we were doing with Adrian this morning, or whichever way you want to do it, whether it's fat or spindly, learnt language is not available for instant communication. It's only available to monitor the output. Indeed, when you've learnt language, the moment you start thinking about whether you've used the third person singular S of the present simple in conversation, your communication is buggered. Excuse my language, because monitor gets in the way of communication. Yet Chrissy, for example, was quite clear about practice. One of the roles of the practicer, if you want to be as good on the violin as he is, one of the roles of a practicer is to actually monitor what they're doing and see if they're getting it right. If you're playing on a double bass or a violin or a viola, are you actually in tune? Have you got the distance between these two fingers right or not? And the only way you know is by listening, watching. I think what I've told you about so far begs a whole lot of questions. I agree with Brita entirely that language learning is not music learning, music practice. Implications of what I've said. This is where there is crossover between the three men of today's presenting little quartet. Implications? Well, the first implication is quite clear. Repetition works. But if repetition works, you have to make it worthwhile. By the way, even a little substitution drill like it's wintertime in Greenwich, summertime, it's summertime in Greenwich, Holborn, it's summertime in Holborn, even that substitution drill of audiolingualism was trying to make repetition worthwhile by forcing you to concentrate. But the real message for, young trainees, the real message for people starting their careers is repetition works. Well, I think repetition works. But you've got to get students doing a Chrissy, breaking it down, concentrating, thinking about it. Maybe it's by putting all the words on your fingers and but repetition works. For example, oh help, this is going to be a bit, I've got to find someone. There must be somebody here. What is it about International House Directors of Studies that, oh, there you are. Okay, so it's a dialogue. So, those are, wow, nice, more. Those are, no, nice, those are nice, those are nice, those are really nice, those are really nice earrings. Everybody? Those are really nice earrings. And she says, thank you. I'm I'm glad you like them. I'm glad you like them. Everybody? I'm glad you like them. So we start again. Those are really nice earrings. Thank you. I'm glad you like them. Where did you get them? Where did you get them? Everybody? Where did you get them? They were a present. They were a present from
Ratners.
No, they're not Ratners. No, stop. There's cultural information which may not be shared. They were a present from my girlfriend. No, it's not that kind of a dialogue. They were a present from my mother. No, not mother. Not mother. No, not daughter. Jesus, how on earth do you mime the word aunt? I just don't know. It's just impossible. Anyway, they were a present from my aunt. They're from. No, that's not China. They don't do that in China. They're from Japan. They're from Japan. They're from Japan, I think. Well, I think they really suit you. So here's the dialogue. Those are really nice earrings. Thank you. I'm glad you like them. Where did you get them? A present from my aunt. They're from Japan, I think. Well, I think they really suit you. So you teach the students that dialogue, and it's absolutely fine. And then, of course, I mean, this is such a bad example, but I haven't got any time. This was just one little example, which I suppose backs up the kind of thing we were hearing about this morning. Here's the dialogue. Well, I think they really suit you. And then what do we do? Well, it's an age-old technique. Probably did it back in the days in Shaftesbury Avenue. Second mention of the day, Shaftesbury Avenue. Only a few of us are old enough to remember Shaftesbury Avenue. It's very depressing. Anyway, so those are really nice earrings. I'm glad you... Where did you... No, I was given them by my aunt. They're from... And so on and so we go. And then off we go. And then the next time we go, those are... really nice earrings. I'm glad you like them. Disappearing dialogues. Where did you get them? I was given them by... Anyway, the disappearing dialogue like this, which you certainly don't need one of these for, all you just do is rub words out, is an example of repetition that is Chrissy-like, because it demands concentration. It demands you focusing on little bits of really thinking what you're saying and what you're doing. And in that sense, I think we're talking something high learning or something. There's something going on which is not just repetition. Even though repetition is important, we somehow have to find ways of making it more concentrated. What about feedback? Well, while Jim was talking this morning, I thought immediately, of course I thought immediately because I'd already planned to mention it. And Keith Morrow had exactly the same thought. I thought immediately of an article from ELT Journal, while Keith was its editor, by Wong and Waring. And they wrote this very good article it's simply called Very Good. Very good as something like that. I'm getting a bit. At any rate, here's the thing about feedback. The most popular form of feedback in any lesson I've observed in the last 10 years is reformulation. Reformulation, if you remember, goes like this. I have seen him yesterday. Oh, so you saw him yesterday, did you? And what I know beyond peradventure is that because I've reformulated it correctly, you're going to go, wow. Oh, I get it. I don't use the present perfect. I use the past simple. Actually, what really happens with reformulation is, I've seen him yesterday. Oh, so you saw him yesterday, did you? Yes, I've seen him yesterday. That's actually what happens with reformulation, and yet reformulation fits absolutely into the landscape that has been painted to us of low demand teaching. It's nice, it's pleasant, it's cheerful, it's lovely, and it's not aggressive or anything like that. And you don't feel offended, because But maybe, and I'll do this quickly because this is very similar to what you've heard already, maybe, oh, by the way, what Wang and Waring say, and this does echo directly something that Jim said, is the whole point of their article about very good was that very good is probably the 2 worst words you can say in any language classroom. Why? Because the moment you say very good, you close the door. It goes further than that. They quote John Fanslow's very famous comment, which is this. If a student says, I saw him yesterday, and I say, very good, the student is left having to decide what was very good. Seriously. Was it very good that they said anything at all? Was it good that they got it right? Was their pronunciation good? Was the content of what they said good? What was very good? And the real problem with very good, of course, is the moment you say very good, everyone says, okay, very good, finish. Something else that occurs to me about feedback. This is all super quick, but one of the most common forms of correction feedback is to use, written correction is to use correction symbols. And correction symbols are very, very popular. But a teacher at the University of Cologne said to me the other day, she said, you know, what really bugs me, she said, is I spend hours of my life, this is so cliched, you'll recognize it, but I promise you this was an accurate quote. This was about 2 or 3 weeks ago. She said, I spent hours of my life all night correcting the essays, and then I hand them back to the students and they just put them in their folders, and that's that. What a waste of my time. She's right. It's a waste of her time. Correction symbols are very useful if they provoke some kind of action on the part of the students, if they provoke some kind of work, if they provoke some kind of, Chrissy again, concentration, some kind of problem solving, but they are absolutely useless if they're just correction symbols. Feedback, to be successful, has to be fed back, and something has to happen with it. Otherwise, what's it all about? I went and looked at the high demand website a couple of days ago just to see what these 2 crazy guys were up to. And there's Adrian saying, you know what, I correct during communicative activities. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but it's what I do, whether you like it or not. He's got a point. And there's a whole other discussion to be had about correction, big time. But what Wang and Waring, 2 of the things they suggest is that instead of saying very good, I love this, you should ask pursuit questions. And pursuit questions are questions why did you say that? What do you mean? Explain yourself. Could you elaborate? It's very much like the Richard Cullen article, do you remember, on feedback from Keith's time as editor, about 2002 or 3 or something like that. Pursuit questions are much better than saying very good, because they actually force you through another door. That instead of just saying, and again I'm repeating what was said earlier, instead of just saying, yeah, that's good, yeah, you got it right, problematize what's going on, make it a problem. Do you agree with did she get it right? Do you agree with that? Is there any other way you could say it? And crucially, with written correction, there is no point in it if it does not provoke some future concentration and future action. And the teachers I went from Cologne, then I went to Aachen, and they said, but we have to correct reams of stuff. How can we do that? Process writing for them is a nightmare because it's so, they've got too much marking already. Well, you don't have to get students to rewrite a whole essay. Remember, small is beautiful. Why not say to students, choose any paragraph from the piece of work that I've corrected and give me back the paragraph rewritten. And then you don't have to correct so much. And they've done a little bit of small, focused correction. So there we are. And by the way, and one of the things that all the correction articles I've looked at recently, I've done a lot on work on correction, is that it goes something like this. This is just a sort of throwaway comment. But it's something like this. There's a very good article, again, from the journal. We were talking about it at lunch, from Al-Hamid, I think his name is. I can't remember his name. And he said, interestingly enough, in written correction, what happens with written correction when teachers take home students' homework is that essentially they guess. We guess what the students are trying to say. We try and work out what it is the students mean, and then we sort of do a correction on that basis. Guess what? We get it wrong about 8 out of 10 times. If we had the student in front of us, we might be able to negotiate and work out what they meant. Other articles I read, and I've got a bit, my brain's gone a bit blank, suggest that actually some of the best feedback is peer feedback. Getting peers to ask pursuit questions, to problematize, to think about things. What next? Well, concentration has to be worthwhile. I'm nervous about everything I've said because, and I'm very nervous about what Jim and Adrian have to say as it happens, and this is something we might want to talk about in the feedback. Because all of this is fine, but lessons only last for a short period of time. And the question is how much of that time you can spend doing what Adrian was doing just now. How much of that time can you spend problematizing, concentrating? Small is beautiful. How do you make concentration worthwhile? Well, maybe it's got something to do with making the teacher a kind of surrogate problem solver. Something about how to get students concentrating on something small with their brains so that they learn something and they don't just do something. I've just read a wonderful book of lectures by Michael Swan called whatever it's called. And you'll see it on the front of the envelope from Oxford University Press you've got in your bags. Yes, it's you know. Listen, I went to see a film last night called Quartet about aging people, and depressing. Anyway, but so anyway, what is it? Was it Tessa? I'm cracking my bones right now. I think trying to chime in. Okay, I won't bend over. What was I talking about? I've absolutely no idea. Okay, so I thought we'd do a little problem-solving activity. For me, an example of how a teacher can get that concentration going. I'll do it very, very quickly. Just see what you think. Very quickly, in your pairs. You've all seen word clouds before. There's nothing special about word clouds. These words all come from the same place. Can you very, very quickly in your pairs, just give you literally a minute and a half, try and work out adjective-noun combinations, especially if you think they're collocations. Adjective-noun combinations, especially if they're collocations. Okay, any combinations very quickly? American Dream. Is that a collocation? Is that a collocation? It's more than a collocation, isn't it? It's almost a cliche. It's what David Crystal calls a lexical zombie, which stalks the language, sinking its teeth into other combinations. American Dream, what else?
Drag to the altar.
Drag to the altar. Drag to the altar. Yeah, drag to the altar. What else?
Great Depression.
The Great Depression. That's a kind of. It's not so much a cliche, more a name. More other ones, other combinations. What?
No, sorry.
More combinations. A better life. We talk about a better life. What did you say? The young generation. Is that a collocation? It's interesting, that, isn't it? Young generation. We don't really collocate younger generation. What do we collocate? Younger. We talk about the younger generation. Anything else? Unwavering hope. Is that a collocation? By the way, remember, collocations, of course, are words that through sheer force of habit have learnt to live with each other for no particular reason other than that people use them a lot. Unwavering hope, is that a collocation? This is fairly weak. I'm not sure. It certainly works. I'm not sure how strong it is as a collocation. Any others you can think of?
Young love.
Young love. Young love. It's too late for that. Young love. Anything else? Anything else? What?
Unyielding struggle.
Unyielding struggle. Now, unless you were in Huhui, which you weren't, I can tell you weren't, or if you're in Automaticity, Poland, it's the only other time I've used this, so you'll know what's coming. If you were in Automaticity, Poland and you came, or you're in Huhui, shut up. For the rest of you, these words all come from the same language event. What do you think it is? What text is this? What kind of a text is this? Constitutional text. It could be the Declaration of Independence. It's got that kind of feel for it. It could be an Obama speech. Could it be a political speech? Something like that, do you think? Might be a political speech? Could be Martin Luther King. What do you think?
Nick Clegg.
Nick Clegg. Sorry, unyielding struggle. Well, it's pretty unyielding, that's for sure. Any other ideas? Well, by the way, if this was a real lesson, I'd keep this going and I'd push it in lots of other ways. But would you like to see or hear or watch where this comes from? Here we go.
Blacksmiths could win independence from an empire, if immigrants could leave behind everything they knew for a better life on our shores, if women could be dragged to jail for seeking the vote, if a generation could defeat a depression and define greatness for all time, if a young preacher could lift us to the mountaintop with his righteous dream, and if proud Americans can be who they are and boldly stand at the altar with who they love, then surely we can give everyone in this country a fair chance at that great American dream. More than anything else, that is the story of this country. The story of unwavering hope grounded in unyielding struggle. That is what has made my story and Barack's story and so many other American stories possible. And let me tell you something, I say all of this tonight, not just as First Lady, no, not just as a wife. You see, at the end of the day, my most important title is still Mom-in-Chief.
Who won the last election? She did. Okay, question for you. Do you think that was a good piece of speech making? Yeah. Did you like it? Yeah. Did you like it? Say no if you didn't like it. What do you think? Comments? What? She peaked too early. It was manipulative. Did she look like she believed it? Again, it was at the bit dark, so you can't see her facial expressions too well. Did she? She looked like she believed it. There were tears welling up and all that kind of thing. Did you like it? No? You bloody cynics, all of you. Okay, next question. By the way, I think it's fantastic as it happens, except for one bit of it which I really don't like, and it tells you something about what you have to do and be to get elected in America. Any idea which bit I didn't like? It's the last bit, isn't it? It's just, my chief role is Mom-in-Chief. And you just think, why do you have to say that? You are the most incredibly competent professional woman, intelligent, successful. You're bloody good at making speeches and all that kind of thing. Why do you have to say, I mean, does he ever stand up and say, my most important job is Dad-in-Chief? No, give me a break. Anyway, that's the bit I didn't like. But the rest of it, forget that bit. Next question, is it effective? And the answer is, she just knew where to get them. She pressed all the right spots. And what I'm going to do is play you the speech again, and I want you to tell me how it was effective. What is it she does that gets everyone in that room going bonkers at this point? What does she do that gets everyone going crazy? If
blacksmiths could win independence from an empire, If immigrants could leave behind everything they knew for a better life on our shores, if women could be dragged to jail for seeking the vote, if a generation could defeat a depression and define greatness for all time, if a young preacher could lift us to the mountaintop with his righteous dream, and if proud Americans can be who they are and boldly stand at the altar with who they love, then surely we can give everyone in this country a fair chance at that great American dream. Because in the end, more than anything else, that is the story of this country. The story of unwavering hope grounded in unyielding struggle. That is what has made my story and Barack's story and so many other American stories possible. And let me tell you something, I say all of this tonight, not just as First Lady, no, not just as a wife. You see, at the end of the day, my most important title is still Mom-in-Chief.
How does she do it? I'm going to do about 3 or 4 minutes on this, then I'm going to make some concluding remarks, because I realise what the time is. How does she do it?
She appeals to everyone.
It's the way she says it really matters. Any bits that you pick out, that you can remember, that you would pick out about her intonation? Yeah, what somebody said? The pausing. What pausing? Did you hear it?
Just before the Mom-in-Chief one, a slight pause, and there was another one.
There's a pause. There's an absolute pause. There's a wonderful pause when she says, go on, Mark.
It's the effect that she uses of dragging out certain very high-weight words, like empire.
She does a lot of kind of really heavy weight on certain words that she wants you to really hear. I want to go back to the pausing. Anything else to say about the pausing? Did you hear the word surely?
Yeah.
Twice. Aha, that's interesting. So what does she do? She doesn't say then surely, surely. She says, then surely. Pause. Surely. Isn't that, it's so powerful that. I mean, admittedly, she's got a microphone on her side of about 50,000 million decibels. That helps. But you know, anything else you noticed about it? Yes?
Learned stutter at some points. It's that small moment where you come into a new movement that her husband does the same thing.
A sort of slight break.
It looks spontaneous, as if the words were just floating out of her, and then she comes into that movement and it gets louder and louder.
Has she practiced? Yeah, I rather agree. The kind of slight catch in the throat, which is what you're talking about. Very effective. Anything else? Yeah. Go on. Yeah. Yes. Look. This is what she said. And it's a classic piece of Socratic dialogue, isn't it? Look what she does. If could. And it's what great speech makers do. They repeat and they repeat and they repeat the same kind of phraseology, the same kind of thing, until you're desperate for them to get to the climax. Please, now. Oh, phew. And that's what good speech making is all about. There's something even more impressive about this. And for me, thinking about it, it goes on. If farmers and blacksmiths could win independence, if women could be dragged to jail, greatness all the time, if young preacher could lift us to the mountaintop of this righteous dream. And then what's amazing for me, because it's not an accident, is she changes the tense. She says, and if what does it say? If proud Americans can be tackling the one issue which, leading up to the election, had gained him brownie points, much to everybody, terrible thing to say, had gained him points, had gained him points, surprising everybody. That when he came out in favour of gay marriage, everyone thought the clouds would fall in, but actually it did him a lot of good. Isn't it a clever piece of speech making? Now, I can't go on about this. My point that I'm trying to make is problematizing, problem solving. It may be at the level that Adrian was doing with one word for word on a finger, but it can also be like this. where you actually get students to concentrate, not on something huge, but on something small, to really think about it. Get them to speak the speech. Get them to practice saying it. Where do you put the pauses? Get them to actually think about it and repeat it. Just this one little thing. The teacher, the problem solver. How does she do it? That's the problem you have to solve. How does she do it? And you talk about the intonation and the stress and the words and precisely the construction and so on. Anyway, lots of questions which I'm going to leave you with now very quickly. First one is this. This is a guy called Courtney Pine. A very, very impressive, incredible current British jazz musician. Everything I said about music practice, I'm slightly worried about where jazz fits into this. Now, if you play, I don't know, if you play the slow movement of the Sibelius Violin Concerto, you will play it beautifully. But you're not going to, you might play it differently from me. Actually, to be quite honest, you will play it differently. But you're not suddenly going to go off on the other direction. Because it's not the deal. What good classical musicians say is my job is to let the composer's voice speak through me. So they stick to the notes. Raleigh Barrio Nuevo is not going to, he's singing a song, so he's not going to suddenly go off in a different direction. He's going to sing the song. But when this guy gets going, and all the great jazz musicians, on the contrary, the whole raison d'etre of jazz is to riff and go off in different directions and do things like that. So what does that say about everything I've been saying about music? And
You can't do that until you've got the basics.
I don't think you can do that unless you've done lots and lots of that concentrated, repetitious stuff. But you will never become a jazz musician if all you ever do is the repetitious stuff. In other words, the only way of becoming a good jazz musician is to play jazz. But you may not be able to play it very well unless you've done all the scales and the this and the backwards and forwards. Here's another question. We know that homework is good for students. Why? Well, because if you do lots of homework, your English will get better. It's as simple as that. Give me an argument against that.
Lots of as opposed to focused.
But exactly the problem comes with people doing lots of homework being weighed down with homework. Two questions arise from this discussion of practice. Number one, how come some kids practice and other kids don't? Because in the end, if you give a bunch of 10 kids the same kind of music tuition, some of them will get really good and some of them won't. And it's quite clear that one of the things that separates out the good ones from the bad ones is how much they practice. And I haven't even begun to address that. I think the teacher in class can do lots of things to make people good practices, but in the end, it's up to you. It's up to you whether you're going to practice or not, if you want to be a good musician. And maybe the key is precisely as Jim has just said, maybe the key is to say a really, really... No, I'm trying to emphasize too much. I'm trying to be Michelle, but obviously that's not going to work. Surely, maybe it's a question of actually thinking carefully about how much homework we give. And maybe lots of tiny little bits of homework are much more successful than one great long woof of homework. Maybe, Steve's small is beautiful thing. Maybe that's the answer to homework. But there's another question which interests me much more, and it really interests me about everything that's been said today, including by the three previous speakers. I'm just trying to think of all the wonderful things about when Barbie had a job, didn't have it. Anyway, but I'm just trying to think of all the digital knowledge that we now need. What's all this high demand stuff? What's all this concentrated short bursts have to say to us in a world where there is a strong suggestion that students can go looking for what they want to do, and they can use their tablets and they can BYOD, which stands for bring your own device. They can bring their own devices to class and stuff like that. What does this say about homework and practice and repetition and so on? Lots of questions. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much for listening to me. That's the end of my talk. It's time for a coffee break.